The nursery was still. A gentle breeze rustled the curtains, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Sarah hummed softly, rocking the empty cradle. Her heart ached with a familiar emptiness. She longed to hear the soft coos of her baby, to feel the warmth of tiny fingers wrapped around hers. But the cradle remained empty, a constant reminder of her loss. She raced back to the nursery, her heart pounding against her ribs. The room was bathed in an eerie blue light emanating from the baby monitor. The air hung heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread. She stared at the empty crib, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. The growling from the monitor intensified, replaced by a high-pitched squeal that sent chills down her spine. The room seemed to pulsate with an unseen energy. Fear, raw and primal, threatened to consume her. She had to get help. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. Days turned into sleepless nights. The terrifying image from the baby monitor replayed in her mind, a constant loop of horror. She had tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light, a figment of her exhausted imagination. But deep down, a chilling certainty took root. Something was terribly wrong. The whispers continued, growing bolder with each passing night. Sometimes they were soft, barely audible murmurs. Other times they were guttural growls that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. They spoke of shadows and darkness, of things that lurked just beyond the veil of perception. Her husband, John, dismissed it as stress and exhaustion. He couldn't hear the whispers, only the static hiss of the monitor. He urged her to seek professional help, convinced she was having a nervous breakdown. But Sarah knew better. This was something more, something sinister that defied rational explanation. Terror gripped her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs. She scrambled back, pressing herself against the headboard, her eyes fixed on the monitor. The voice, cold and devoid of emotion, continued to speak. It spoke of a place of shadows and darkness, a place where lost souls wandered aimlessly. It taunted her with glimpses of Emma, describing her laughter, her scent, the feel of her tiny hand in hers. Details only she, her mother, could know. Her mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the impossible. Was Emma alive? Trapped somewhere between this world and the next? Desperate for answers, she tried to engage the voice. She pleaded for Emma's safe return, her voice cracking with despair, but the entity only laughed, a chilling sound that echoed the emptiness in her own heart. It spoke of sacrifices, of ancient pacts, of a debt that needed to be repaid. As the nights wore on, the messages became more frequent, more insistent. The voice demanded she follow its instructions, threatening to drag Emma further into the abyss if she disobeyed. Fear warred with a mother's fierce love. She would do anything to get her daughter back, even if it meant confronting the unknown. The once familiar walls of her home now felt like the bars of a prison. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the floorboard sent shivers down her spine. The digital eyes of the baby monitor followed her every move, a constant reminder of her invisible tormentor. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant state of hypervigilance. The whispers followed her everywhere, seeping into her thoughts, poisoning her waking hours. She felt herself slipping, her grasp on reality growing more tenuous with each passing day. John, oblivious to the true nature of her torment, watched with growing concern. He pleaded with her to rest, to eat, to seek professional help. But how could she explain the unexplainable? How could she make him understand that their daughter, though gone, was not truly gone at all? The weight of her secret, the burden of her grief, threatened to crush her. She was trapped in a waking nightmare, haunted by whispers from beyond the grave, tormented by an entity that held her daughter's fate in its ethereal hands. Driven to the brink, Sarah sought solace in the forbidden. She delved into ancient texts, her fingers tracing the faded ink of forgotten rituals. She consulted with psychics and mediums, their eyes widening with each whispered detail she revealed. The answers, when they came, were fragmented, shrouded in cryptic warnings and veiled threats. They spoke of a digital gateway, inadvertently opened through the grief and despair that clung to the baby monitor. A portal that allowed a malevolent entity to cross over, to prey on her vulnerability, to claim what was not rightfully its own. The entity, they explained, fed on fear, on despair, on the raw, untamed emotions that emanated from her broken heart. It had latched onto her grief, using her love for Emma as a weapon against her. To defeat it, she would need to confront her deepest fears, to sever the emotional tether that bound her to the digital realm. Armed with this newfound knowledge, she formulated a plan, a desperate gamble to outwit the entity, to turn its own power against it. It was a dangerous game she was playing, one with potentially devastating consequences. But for her daughter, she was willing to risk everything. Following the instructions gleaned from her research, Sarah gathered the necessary artifacts, a white candle, a mirror, and the baby monitor itself. She waited until the witching hour, the time when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, when the entity's power was at its peak. She placed the mirror opposite the monitor, creating an infinite reflection that stretched into the digital abyss. With trembling hands, she lit the candle, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air crackled with anticipation, thick with the stench of ozone and fear. As the clock struck midnight, the monitor flickered to life. The static intensified, resolving into a swirling vortex of colours and shapes. The entity's voice boomed from the device, its tone laced with amusement and malice. "You cannot defeat me, Sarah," it hissed. "You are mine, and so is your child." But Sarah held firm. She had faced her fears, confronted her grief. She was no longer the terrified mother, paralyzed by despair. She was a warrior, fueled by a mother's love, determined to reclaim what was rightfully hers. "You are wrong," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Emma is not yours, and neither am I." With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah plunged the candle into the heart of the mirror. The glass shattered, a deafening crack that echoed through the house. The digital vortex in the monitor pulsed violently, its hold on this world weakening. The entity shrieked in fury, its voice a cacophony of static and rage. The room grew cold, the air thick with the smell of burning electronics. The shadows on the walls writhed and contorted as if alive, desperate to escape the collapsing portal. Sarah pressed her advantage. She grabbed the baby monitor, its plastic hot to the touch, and hurled it into the fireplace. Flames erupted, consuming the device in a fiery inferno. The entity's screams reached a deafening crescendo before abruptly ceasing, leaving behind an eerie silence. As the smoke cleared and the flames subsided, Sarah collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The whispers were gone, the entity banished back to the digital abyss from whence it came. A glimmer of hope, fragile yet persistent, flickered in her heart. In the aftermath of that harrowing night, a semblance of normalcy returned. John, though shaken by the experience, attributed the events to an electrical fire and Sarah's overactive imagination. He insisted they move, to leave the painful memories behind. They packed their belongings, the remnants of their shattered lives, and drove away from the house on the hill. Sarah tried to forget, to bury the terror deep within her mind, but the fear lingered, a persistent shadow in the corner of her eye. One evening, as they were unpacking in their new home, Sarah stumbled upon a forgotten box. Inside, nestled amongst Emma's tiny clothes and toys, lay the shattered remains of the baby monitor. A chill ran down her spine as she picked up a shard of the broken screen. As her fingers brushed against the cold plastic, a faint static hiss filled the air. And then she heard it, a whisper barely audible, yet unmistakable in its chilling familiarity. "We will be back for her, Sarah," it hissed, "and this time there will be no escape." Sarah stared at the broken monitor, her blood turning to ice. The entity was gone, banished back to the digital abyss. But its parting words echoed in her mind, a chilling promise of a nightmare that had no end. She realized, with a terrifying certainty, that some wounds ran too deep to ever truly heal. The digital world, once a source of comfort and connection, now held a sinister undercurrent, a lurking darkness that whispered her name. She was trapped in a perpetual state of unease, forever haunted by the unseen forces that lurked just beyond the veil of perception. The whispers in the dark were a constant reminder that the digital realm held secrets best left undisturbed, that some doors once opened could never be truly closed. And as she looked at the innocent face of her sleeping husband, she knew that she could never truly share the burden of her knowledge. The truth, too monstrous to comprehend, would forever remain hers alone, a chilling secret that whispered in the darkest corners of her mind.